Hello, my fine friends over on YouTube. How are you doing? My name's Octavian. It's good to have you here. I hope you're all enjoying your day, all of those nice pleasantries and such. So, I've got some builds to bring you, and I gotta give you guys a fair warning going into this. Not all of these are the best League starters. I've aimed to collect some of the more interesting builds. I've aimed to put some of the more interesting ideas into path building that I can think of going into next League, and as a result, they're not all incredibly good at everything. If you want a really good League starter, and you want it to have that Octavian spice, that Octavian touch to it, I would actually really just suggest my Fire Trap build that I started last League with, and that inexplicably got sort of buffed going into this League. I say sort of buffed because trap throwing time was reduced and cluster traps was nerfed, but Fire Trap is buffed by 40% base damage. So I think it about evens out, and Fire Trap is basically as strong as it was last patch. So go ahead and give that a go, be murdering Shaper within the first week, and have millions and millions of Uber-Elder DPS. It's very solid, very powerful, and I highly recommend it. You can find a link to the video for that below. However, because I want to do some things that are out of the box, and because I've had some viewers suggest me some really interesting builds, I basically just wanted to share some of these more interesting concepts with you. And the first one that we've got here for your perusal is a Glacial Hammer Juggernaut. And now, this build, there's a few changes that I want to make to it, and I want to take you guys through those changes and through my justifications for them, but this build came to me from a viewer named Cozy Colombian, and I really, really like the concept. It's a very cheap budget starter setup that gets a high average damage hit out of Glacial Hammer, which is really, really important, because what you're trying to do with Glacial Hammer is hop into a pack, press your Glacial Hammer button once, have Ancestral Call and your free splash from the jewels, slap the whole pack at once for you, have it all blow up with like Herald Vice or something for extra shatters, and then jump to the next pack and do it again. And it's got this really satisfying, crunchy sound effect and satisfying as heck gameplay to it. And I think that this build will deliver on that for quite a good budget quite early on. As we go through the weapons, you can see we're using a Frost Breath, which is a great choice. I want to see people use Frost Breath more often. The attacks with this weapon deal double damage to chilled enemies is really easy to activate. It's very, very easy to chill enemies. There's a lot of different ways you can do it guaranteed, through generating chilled ground, and even just doing enough cold damage on a crit to chill them is easy as heck to begin with. So the idea here is you chill enemies with Frost Breath and cheat out a bunch of damage that way, because any damage that you add to your attacks with a Frost Breath, because even though the base DPS is rather low, any damage you add is going to get double effectiveness from the attacks, deal double damage to chilled enemies effect. Princess as a cheap offhand for some fizz as extra cold. Starkonja's Hood, cheap life, attack speed, crit helmet, fairly popular early on. Tabula Rasa, for obvious reasons. Some rare gloves, rare ring, rare amulet, and rare belt with life and res for the most part, and Counterards, which I don't quite agree with. I think I would take this build in the direction of going for Unstoppable to get a bit of extra movement speed, to just go a little bit faster through maps and other such content, and switch the Counterards for some rare boots or something along those lines. But I can certainly see the reasoning behind going Unrelenting. Unrelenting is a very powerful defensive node, and potentially in Delves will be necessary to push a decent distance down into Delves. That was an alliterative sentence, and it was a lot of fun. But let's go over the tree briefly. As you can see, this is crit focused. We pick up the dual wield crit nodes because we are fake dual wielding with an offhand that the skill won't actually use in the form of Princess, stat sticking essentially. And technically, since we're dual wielding, we can make use of this. We grab some damage and pen over here, some crit, some life. This is the one stretch in the tree that I'm not super convinced by, but I don't see anywhere else to spend those nodes more effectively. Spending some very efficient time in Duelist picking up weapon range, which is hugely important for Glacial Hammer. Life, some more dual wield focus damage the Leech will require, and some pen. And over in the Marauder area, it's a lot of life nodes being clicked, plus some endurance charges, and some very juicy melee crit with the Disemboweling Wheel. I'm tempted a little bit to try and go for Battle Cry and get those instant War Cries. I really like War Cries, I always have, and now that they're instant, I just want to throw these nodes onto every tree, but they're a little out of the way, and the stun immunity doesn't do crap for us, because we're probably either going to go Calm's Roots or for the Juggernaut stun immunity, so not too much efficacy going down there in the tree. So really, all in all, I would say this tree is very efficiently built, and I like it quite a bit. With that said, let's cover the skill setup, and then we'll be done here, and we can move on to some of the other builds I've got ready for you to look at. So this is our 5-link right now. We've got Glacial Hammer, Melee Fizz, Elemental Damage with Attacks, Ancestral Call, and Chance to Bleed. Chance to Bleed being very powerful with a Frost Breath because that base physical damage is incredibly strong. When you double it with Frost Breath, Hypothermia might be a little bit more damage, but as you can see, it's 0.5% more damage, but Hypothermia will only be active on the second hit against an enemy because the first hit will chill them. So Chance to Bleed gives us more upfront burst against unchilled packs, which those are the things that we need to guarantee slaughter in a single hit. So this is our 5-link setup. We've got Hatred, Ancestor Protector for bossing disabled because we want to just see a accurate average hit. Same thing with Frostbomb. Summon Ice Golem for a bit of extra crit, Blood Rage for some Frenzy Charge Gen and attack speed, Leap Slam for mobility. You could also use Whirling Blades, especially if you can get a better stat stick with an attack speed roll, which you'd also still want Fizz's Extra Cold on for that juicy single hit DPS or burst hit, whatever you want to call it. Not going to be dual wielding Frost Breath, no. Surprised at how little damage we lost on that, though. Switching over to the Frost Breath. That's neat. And Herald of Ice with Assassin's Mark Curse on hit to generate power charges so that we have all 3 of them while we're running about clearing stuff and ensure 1 hits as often as possible. That, of course, being the goal, as I've iterated a few times. Let's check the Ascendancy nodes real fast. Undeniable solves all of our accuracy problems for us, is a beautiful pair of nodes. Unbreakable is very powerful defensively, and as I said, I think I would sooner go Unstoppable and swap out the boots than go for Unrelenting, but I can certainly understand the Unrelenting choice, and Unflinching, of course, gets us there. Though even if you switch over to Unstoppable, Unflinching is still in the tree because it's very, very good, and you can't reach anything else. So, the last point that I do want to mention is we get our melee splash, as I sort of alluded to earlier, from Winter Burial, which gives you cold-only splash damage to surrounding targets. If you have 40 strength in radius, you want 2 of these to get the conversion that you need to be 100% cold converted, and you really want to be 100% cold converted because that will make it so that you're not losing out on any of your damage splashing, because of course you will only splash your cold damage. So you don't want to be adding any flat lightning or any flat fire or anything like that. If you're going to use Abyssal Jewels, make sure that you're adding flat cold to attacks and flat cold to mace attacks. And if you're going to use regular jewels, go for crit and crit multi. These regular jewels are going to be far more expensive than the Abyssal Jewels here, but these still pack a punch of 45,000 average hit. So that's that. If you guys are interested at all in this off-the-wall, oddball Glacial Hammer Jug starter, then feel free to check in the description below. There will be a link there for you to look over the gear yourself at your own leisure. And we're going to go ahead and move on to the next build, which is not a league starter, and which is the build that I'm going to be saving up to be able to play as my second build in the next league, in which I just want to kind of explain to you guys, partially so that I can get it off my chest, because I made this and I got really excited about it, and I haven't had anyone to talk to about it for a little while, so I'm really excited, and you guys are going to sit there and listen to me talk. No, I promise it's good. It's a real build. Don't laugh at me. So, for those of you who don't follow the Twitch channel, you may not be aware, but I recently became the proud owner of an alternate art Demigod's Dominance by playing Blade Vortex Guardian in the Soul Self-Found hardcore race in this last flashback race. And it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Blade Vortex Guardian. I picked Guardian because it's an easy ladder to climb in Solo Self-Found Hardcore, and I picked Blade Vortex because it's a very powerful skill that doesn't require a lot of investment from the Ascendancy to be good. But boy, was I surprised at how strong it actually was. Because of Guardian's Power, Frenzy, and, most importantly, Endurance Charge gen, I was able to keep up a permanent Immortal Call, as well as just get a bunch of extra utility stats, attack speed, crit chance, that kind of thing. And because of all the defensive stats of Guardian at the time, pre-rework, and some of those are definitely still in place, I was able to get a massive amount of block and extra move speed and a ton of recovery. And I basically felt immortal at all times. The only way I ever really felt at risk of dying was if I stood in front of a volatile or on top of a bunch of bearer bombs. Those really felt like the only threats that ever came up during mapping, which was really nice. So, I want to see what I can accomplish with that in a trade league, and I'm taking this build in a far different direction from my original Guardian, which was crit and used a dagger and shield charge and was using impulses, which I happened to find fairly early on in the race, and which was just all around built for mapping, whereas this one is going to be built to capitalize on Guardian's tankiness and also output more significant single target damage than what I was able to achieve with my first iteration. That said, let's get into how it works. This is built around Disintegrator. Now, I think Disintegrator potentially, depending on how many people catch on, potentially is going to be seeing a lot more play coming next league, because I think staffs as a weapon class are going to be a lot more forgiving because of the changes to Flame Dash in particular. Flame Dash having like 79 or 89% in inherent cooldown reduction on it now, and you can stack even more if you want, so you can actually get Flame Dash to be a somewhat legitimate movement skill, at least up whenever you need it, so long as you're not spamming it. And more importantly, I think that clear speed won't be as big of an issue in delves. I hope that what GGG has said about delves being a contest where you have to keep up with the cart rather than the cart having to keep up with you because the enemies and the content are so dangerous and challenging at high enough tiers, I hope that that's true. Because I really want content like that, because that really encourages you to try some of the ridiculously high damage or high defensively oriented things in the game that previously were locked out by not being fast enough clearing. And Disintegrator is one of those. Disintegrator has absolutely absurdly disgusting damage. I'll demonstrate. So right now I have 655,000 total DPS. If I take off the Disintegrator, I am at 247,000. This weapon alone increases my damage by 165%. Now that is obviously taking into account this is an Elder item, this is an Elder item, this is a Shaper item, and this is an Elder item. So that's 4 additional siphoning charges we're getting here, and those are doing extra work because of Disintegrator. So it's a little facetious to say by itself, but sort of, yes, by itself, because you don't get those siphoning charges if you don't have the Disintegrator. So this weapon can supercharge a build. In particular, it's very, very synergistic with Blade Vortex, and I guess I'll describe exactly how for those of you who haven't used it, because it's not super popular. As you can see, it adds an absolute ton of flat physical damage to spells, but in addition to that, you get extra physical damage to spells per siphoning charge, and you get +1 max siphoning charge per Shaper or Elder item you have equipped. You also get non-chaos as extra chaos, which applies at multiple steps if you're doing conversion. So that means if, like this build, you're converting from physical damage to cold and I believe fire, let me make sure I'm doing lightning, fizz to lightning and Hermburn. So I'm converting 50% of my physical damage to cold and 50% to lightning. The non-chaos is extra chaos effect from Disintegrator takes effect on my physical damage, and then takes effect on my cold damage after conversion happens, and then takes effect on my lightning damage after conversion happens. So that means really what's happening is I'm gaining 8% of non-chaos, or 8% of my damage as chaos damage per siphoning charge, because I'm gaining sort of 2% of it for the cold, 2% of it for the lightning, and 4% of it for the fizz that it's, all of it that is fizz at the start. And then I get Fizz Damage Reduction, which is less relevant for this build. And then Leech, which is quite nice, actually. And then here's the kicker. Take 150 physical damage per second per siphoning charge if you've used a skill recently. This is very difficult to sustain, usually, as most builds want to use skills. Most of them, you'll find, in Path of Exile do. And on this build alone, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Shaper and Elder Touch items right now. So every time I use a skill, I'm taking, 500 plus that, 750 physical damage per second, and physical dots are some of the hardest things to mitigate in the game, unless you have an Immortal Call that lasts a really long time. So that's the reason we go Guardian with this build. Guardian, aside from just me wanting to pay homage to the build that got me my first demi, but Guardian gains endurance charges on hit, and having played a lot of Guardian in that race, I can assure you, you gain a lot of them very quickly, more than enough to keep up a long duration Immortal Call. And that, plus duration scaling on the tree, because it's a Blade Vortex build, and Blade Vortex wants duration scaling on the tree, plus increased duration and efficacy, makes it so that we have an Immortal Call that, when charged with endurance charges, lasts roughly 4-ish seconds, and 3 to 4-ish seconds. I'd have to check. I'm relying on memory when really I can just go and look here. 3.4 seconds, and with a cooldown of 3. So as long as I'm spamming as long as I'm spamming Immortal Call on cooldown, which sadly it actually got retracted in the patch notes that Immortal Call was going to be instant. I planned this build before that changed. So in the development manifesto, or in the instant skills announcement, they said that Immortal Call was going to be literal instant cast, like you could use it while moving, and then it wasn't on the list of skills in the patch notes that were instant. So I'm not sure what to believe there. I imagine that means that Immortal Call won't be literal instant, in that it can be cast while moving, which is a little unfortunate because I did want to self-cast Immortal Call for this, because any other setup is going to be a lot more clunky. But I still think you can make it work. You can have 0.4 seconds in which to cast the Immortal Call and basically just be physical damage immune all the time and ignore Disintegrator's downside through that means. Perhaps a little bit of a clunky playstyle, but I think it'll be fun. The other items, I'll quickly go through them, are a rare helmet that I put a life roll on just so I can see my life total, which doesn't really have anything going on, just life and res here. Calm's Heart, because we have our 6 link in Disintegrator. Primburn for some of our Fizz to Cold conversion, again conversion being very powerful with Disintegrator. Some boots with life and movement speed, an amulet with a bit of Fizz as extra, and a life roll. This is an Elder item, which is key to charging up our Disintegrator. Mark of the Shaper, because that 70% increased spell damage is pretty ridiculous. If I switch off of it, we can see exactly how ridiculous. It gives me 20% increased damage by itself. Percent damage being very powerful in a build that has this much flat and this much gained as extra. Pardon me. And a 2-stone ring with Curse with Warlord's Mark on hit, and a Rustic Sash that's Elder touched with... I just threw a Chaos Res roll on it. Some good Elder mod. Life recovery might be best, but really it doesn't matter, just has to be an Elder item. Ideally, this would be an Elder item, and this would be an Elder item as well. I tried to keep it moderately budget. I was really hoping I could do this as a starter, but Disintegrator is an Uber Elder item, so no. No, I can't. I can't do it as a starter. And we already saw what happens if I take the Disintegrator off. It's a pretty big deal. So, let's go ahead and look through the passive tree here. It's fairly simple. We've gone for Ellie Overload because we get so much base physical damage and we get so much Fizz gained as extra, and I want to use New Guardian and I want to go for Radiant Crusade, Unwavering Crusade, that we don't really need crit to scale our damage well, and I want to fit in minion stuff on this tree because I want to see whether or not the minions from Radiant Crusade are good, or rather the minions from Herald of Purity, buffed by Radiant Crusade and Unwavering Crusade. Even if they're not, the Herald is flat Fizz, which is good, and with Spiritual Aid, we get to scale all this minion damage and have it apply to me, which is great. It's not even really that big of a loss. We scale this attack speed and this minion damage, and it all applies to me. Spiritual Aid, by the way, really good node. This goes into like almost any build that goes past here. Like if you're playing a totem build, and you're picking up Ancestral Bond because you're on a totem build, seriously consider Spiritual Aid. Even if you're not scaling minions. Because if you do the math on these, it's like 15% average damage per node just getting to Spiritual Aid. Like that's just a good wheel for percent damage. And then it also, if you're over here, opens up this wheel, and if you're over here, opens up picking up Lord of the Dead. And a lot of builds that want Ancestral Bond are also over here getting Blast Radius, or Alchemist, or Cruel Prep. You know, these are just good nodes, and you get to pick up Lord of the Dead, which is 15% for one node. Like that's just good. I imagine we'll see that show up in a bunch of builds in the future. The rest of the tree is focused mainly on life. I guess we get this duration cluster here, that's fairly important. Go over here because there's good nodes, basically. We could pick up Written in Blood. That's probably better average life than these nodes. I didn't see that earlier. So Written in Blood being 4, 4, 4, and 8 is actually about the same. Yep. Scales a little bit of ES. I mean, technically that's better. 2, 3, 4. I guess we can drop out of these and pick up these. Have the same percent life and slightly higher energy shield. Yeah. But that's about it. As far as the skill goes, we've got Blade Vortex linked to Fizz to Lightning, Control Destruction, Ellie Focus, and Efficacy. This is the damage only on a 5 link as well. If we pop in that added fire there, then we're seeing about 800k. Shaper DPS, this is up against Shaper. It is with all charges up, but Guardian generates all charge types on hit. So this is a very realistic buff setup to have. And because of the Herald of Purity that I'll be running, I also will always have a ally nearby, so I'll always be getting that damage multiplier as well. So these buffs are incredibly realistic. If you want to be unrealistic about your single target damage, you can click these flasks and you can go look at Vol Blade Vortex 2. So we're seeing 1 million Blade Vortex DPS and 660,000 Vol Blade Vortex damage, so like 1.7 million DPS under ideal circumstances, but ideal circumstances probably won't pop up too often. And that's not even ideal circumstances, because you could have Elder and Shaper helmets and boots, and theoretically, you can have an Elder Calm's Heart or an Elder pair of Hrim Sorrows. I don't think you can have Elder Hrim Burns, because that's a prophesied version, and I don't know if it keeps its Elder effect. But you could chance into Elder Hrim Sorrows, theoretically. You could even have a Sin's Rebirth. You could min-max this to hell, is what I'm saying. But the starting point is fairly solid. I really like this build. I'm definitely going to be doing it at some point next league, and I hope you guys don't mind that it's not a starter build and I threw it into this video, which isn't really about starter builds, but it's just about interesting builds for next league. Let's see. I'm sure that you've seen your fair share of Caustic Arrow builds, but this is my take on a passive tree for a Mind Over Matter Caustic Arrow Trickster, and that really is all that it is. I don't have much for gear, just a Silver Bow because it gives +2 bow gems and is fairly available early on if you spam prophecies. I went for Trickster because I wanted the recovery engine that Trickster has to offer, plus a bunch of regen to support it, and also the ability to go Mind Over Matter really effectively. Basically, I wanted a rather tanky version of a Caustic Arrow build, and it's still got solid dot DPS, which is what we're scaling. If you want a higher damage version of a Caustic Arrow build that maybe will end up being a bit squishier, I think Pathfinder is better, and then you can scale hybrid both the hit and the dot. I've seen a lot of builds do that. This build, though, it's not really even a build, but this tree really is just a lot more defensively oriented, and as a result heads up over on here into Witch and such. So this will also be linked in the description below, and the one last thing I wanted to mention was another fairly rough idea that I've been working out the details of, which is a Berserker Corpse Explosion build. Now, the reason you'd want to go Berserker to focus on Corpse Explosions is because Berserker's 40% more damage is one of the few generic more multipliers in the game. Actually, I think it really is the only one, and as such will hit all of the Corpse Explosions you can fit into a build. And getting more multipliers to affect Corpse Explosions is really, really powerful. Monster health scales hard at higher levels and potentially could scale very hard in Delves. This is why something like Impulses is so incredibly strong. This is why the RF build that Isla does every race is rather good for clearing and has very consistent cleanup of mobs, because those Corpse Explosion effects are pretty ridiculous. And going Aspect of Carnage and using Abyssal Cry, using Infernal Blow as this build does, you could do, if you wanted to, you could do like Blade Vortex, Dual Oblitz if you don't want to go the Infernal Blow route, if you want to do a spell casting route, and getting an Impulses in there, and getting the Abyssal Cry, and going Ellie Overload as well, because that will hit. That's another more multiplier that will hit Impulses. It'll hit a Shaper weapon if you want to use a Shaper weapon with explosions on death, with fire explosions on death, or use the upgraded Kecholi, the Pan Quetzalitzli, which also has that. Is just really, really strong, using all of those things together. And Corpse Explosion effects, by the way, can overlap. If you hit an enemy and shock them with an Impulses, have them debuffed with Abyssal Cry, hit them with Infernal Blow, and what else? Are using a Shaper weapon, then you will explode them for 5%, 8%, 5%, and 10% of their life, respectively, all at the same time, which is kind of busted. And Berserker will apply to all of that. So maybe Berserker has a niche going forward. I don't know. Maybe this isn't powerful enough. Maybe it doesn't warrant the investment of your Ascendancy enough, but this is the tree that I put together for an Infernal Blow Berserker, which does its best to take advantage of Aspect of Carnage's scaling of Corpse Explosions. And if you're interested in that, you can find a description, or you can find a link to the build in the description below. So, I hope you liked this video. If you did and you'd like to stick around for more, you can always subscribe, and if you didn't and you want to let me know why, you can always comment below. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you in the next one.